Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video. Today's a little bit different. Rather than going over a deck or some duels, we're going to be talking a little bit about the metagame here towards the end of Season 2 and what the meta is possibly going to be looking like as we head into Season 3 here. Now, I'm currently at masterduelmeta.com. If you see the URL up there, see masterduelmeta.com/tier list. And if you just go to masterduelmeta.com, you'll just end up here at a page where you can click any of these anyway. So I'm currently looking at the tier list here. At the time of recording this, it is February 22nd. However, I don't anticipate that this tier list will look too different by the time the actual end of the season rolls around, which is closer to when this is going to be uploaded. So for those who are unfamiliar with this resource here of Master Duel Meta, it is a very, very useful one for learning not only about decks that you might want to play, but also definitely against decks that are going to be top in the meta that you're going to probably be playing against. I've always been a proponent of, knowing thy enemy, so to speak. And I think even if you're not planning on playing any meta decks, doing this kind of research on them is still important. So that way you know kind of how to play against them, or at least what to watch out for. So I think this is a very good resource to use in that way. There are a couple of things we have to know about it. One, we see these power rankings here, underneath each card. What does that mean? If we look down here, power rankings are computed based on each deck's placings in MDM events. The more competitive and more recent the event, the more points each deck type earns for placing well in it. Exact power score is normalized by taking a deck's type total power, dividing it by the cumulative power of all decks. So a deck with a score of 5 compromises 5% of the current format's total power. So that is one thing to note, is that the power is percentage based, but it's not percentage of the overall representation in the meta. It's percentage based on decks, only among decks that frequently appear in the meta, which is a small distinction but an important one. Another thing to note here is we see this tab that says tournaments only. So this tier list is currently only reflecting lists that are actually used in tournaments, which is important to note because some tournaments that get played from Master Duel are best of 3, so decks are going to be built a little bit differently for that format, as they will be having side decks. So if you want to only look at ranked ladder, you just, hit this here, and then we get a different tier list here. Interestingly enough, there is no quote-unquote tier 1, because the threshold for tier 1, as defined by Master Duel Meta, is a power level of 15 or above. But, I mean, since there's nothing at tier 1, we can pretty much assume that Tri-Brigade Zodiac is tier 1, and then we can kind of conclude that all these other decks are tier 2. They see a little bit more even play than they do in tournaments, which is a bit more in line with what I've experienced on ladder. So I think this is a fairly reflective representation of what's on ladder. What is important to note, though, is that, and this is going to be something that seems like a minor point, but I think it is an important one. When you land on the page, it's tournaments only by default. Now, I don't think everybody's going to notice this, so I think a lot of people kind of take this to be the ranked ladder meta, and honestly, for all intents and purposes, this is actually fairly representative of the ranked ladder meta as well. It's a bit more of a nuanced take than, simply this, but I do think it is important to note that, because as a rule of thumb, in any card game, players tend to follow the meta more than keep up, advance on it, so to speak. Advance on it? What is the phrase I'm looking for? Stay ahead of it. Yeah, so this reflection here of DRYTRON, as you can see, it's got a green arrow because the power level has been going up recently. I think even as recently as yesterday, DRYTRON was below Virtual World, and I think between Virtual World and ADAMANCIPATOR in terms of power level. Same with Eldritch, I think was at tier 2 the other day, and now it's down to tier 3. You can see it's actually on the decline a little bit. So what does this mean? If people follow the meta, and this is the meta that they're seeing, well, if people see that DRYTRON is seeing an uptick in playage, then I think more people are going to be more inclined to play DRYTRON. So, particularly with the beginning of Season 3 coming up here, again, at the time of recording this next week, by the time this video is uploading, probably within the next day or two, the other thing to know about that is that DRYTRON does have its reputation, right? You go to the Master Duel subreddit, you see a lot of posts about how annoying heralds are, and how how much it sucks to play against DRYTRON when they can just negate everything you can do. And while, I think I mentioned this before too in another video, while that kind of might indicate like, oh, DRYTRON is an unpopular deck, well, the attention that it gets is actually going to make it more popular, because people see these posts and they think, oh, like DRYTRON's this really annoying deck, it must be really good. And also, if my opponents are consistently annoyed by it, they might concede, you know, more early than they might have to against me. They say there's no such thing as bad press, and that is true for Yu-Gi-Oh decks as well. So going into Season 3, I do expect to see a bit more DRYTRON on the ladder than maybe we did even mid-Season 2, but definitely more than the beginning of Season 2. So let's talk about actually the difference between the meta now versus the meta at the beginning of Season 2. At Season 2, we actually saw a lot more like of a spread of Tier 1 decks, right? DRYTRON was considered a Tier 1 deck, Virtual World was considered a Tier 1 deck. For a while, even Leerless Tri-Brigade was even considered a Tier 1 deck. That was more towards the end of Season 1 than the beginning of Season 2, but Eldritch by a lot of people was considered to be a Tier 1 deck. If we go over here to top decks, we can actually see more decks than just what's on the tier list. You can see you can find decks for plenty of different decks. But yeah, like, I mean, at the end of Season 1, right, I even said, like, oh, I think Sky Striker is a Tier 1 deck, whereas Sky Striker is definitely something I would call Tier 3 nowadays. But that was also kind of just the beginning, so to speak, of Master Duel at the beginning of Season 2, right? The game had only been out for 2 weeks, so people were still sussing out the meta a little bit, but yeah, if we go back to the tier list here, yeah, so as the format progressed, Zodiac Tri-Brigade did end up becoming just the kind of go-to really powerful laddering deck. As I, not to toot my own horn here, but I did kind of say, even from my first video back in January, like, hey, this deck is really strong, especially in Master Duel, because, like, it's strong going first, you have strong plays going second, you can play a lot of hand traps, your combos don't require a whole lot of cards to invest in, to like go into them, so you can afford to play a bunch of tech cards like Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, Droplet, you know, you've got your hand traps, like I said, like Maxi, Ash Imperm. This just makes Zodiac Tri-Brigade an overall just very well-rounded deck, which is very good in a ranked meta, and also in the tournament meta, apparently, as well. So I think because people started to realize that, they started to lean more into Zodiac Tri-Brigade, and that does contribute to its popularity, or its overall like representation in the current meta, but I also do think it's just because it is just that powerful of a deck. So what does that mean for like a potential ban list, right? Or an update to the ban list, rather. I don't think one's going to be going into Season 3. I think we'll likely see a ban list towards the end of Season 3, which means it'll probably get announced like maybe early to mid-Season 3. We'll see. But I could definitely see a world where Tenki goes to 1. Like, if anything is going to get hit, I think Tenki's probably first on the chopping block. I could definitely see Tenki going to 1. I could potentially even see Fractal and or Revolt going to 1 as well. Not that I think that we need to gut the deck like a whole lot. I mean, obviously I'm a little biased because I played Tri-Brigades, right? But the deck's not even like oppressively powerful. It is just seeing a lot of representation in the meta. And I think if you cut back a little bit on its tools, you'll start to see like a bit more of an even spread of the meta. As for DRYTRON, I mean, Ben 10 should definitely go to 1, right? I mean, we all know like how annoying Ben 10 is and the constant searching. So Ben 10 should definitely go to 1. I could see Eva maybe getting banned like it is in the TCG, but I also am inclined to think that's not going to happen. Maybe Eva will go to 1. I don't think that really matters, because I think they only play 1 Eva anyway. Or it might even already be at 1, I'm not sure, but Virtual World, well, anything can hit in Virtual World. Yeah, True King of All Calamities, aka Very Fun Dragon, is probably going to get hit. I could see that getting banned. It would just make sense to be in line with other hits we've seen. ADAMANCIPATOR, I don't really know is an issue, and I don't really know enough about the deck to say what definitively could or will or should be hit in that deck. Eldritch, I mean, I think these tier 3 decks are all pretty much fine. I don't even think, because I know in the TCG Simor got banned, but the other thing you have to remember too is that Leerlusk was a lot more prevalent in the TCG because Maxi is banned in the TCG, and Maxi is easily the hand trap that hurts Leerlusk the most. Other hand traps like Leerlusk can usually play out of, but Maxi is the one that completely shuts it down, so that's why Leerlusk is not US Tri-Brigade is not as powerful here in Master Duel as it is in the TCG, and why I don't think Sigmar needs to get banned or the deck really needs to get hit. Same with like Phantom Knights, even Eldritch, you know, people, I could see skill drain going to 1, sure, but I don't know that it'll happen. I don't think it'll happen, honestly, because TCG just got skill drain back to 3, so I think Konami overall is satisfied with skill drain being at 3 at this time. And I don't even know that that's a huge issue. It's annoying, sure, but skill drain isn't like ruining the meta or anything. I actually think we're in a pretty solid meta right now. Again, that's easy for me to say as a Zodiac Tri-Brigade player, right? But I do think we are in a fairly solid meta at this time. And honestly, I'm a little bit apprehensive, honestly, for a ban list and or a new set to come out. Just because I'm a little afraid, like, oh, what if the new meta ends up being not as much fun? But, I mean, I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out. But, okay, so I think for this next part, we're going to go ahead and start looking at the breakdowns for some of these top decks here. So let's go ahead and cut over to the first one. Okay, so we're here at the tier list, and if you actually click one of these decks here, it'll take you to a breakdown of the deck. Now, what is this? So this is a composition, basically, of how many copies of each card appear and what percent of each, of all decks, rather, across both tournaments and ranked ladder. It'll also give you a sample deck pulled randomly from one of the decks that have hit Plat 1 or have done well in a tournament. So again, this is a very, very useful tool. I would not use this as your only tool, of course, to build your deck. I think it definitely helps to look at not just the one sample list, but to also click through, again, going to top decks up here, to click through and actually look at all of the different deck lists there. That's usually what I do when I'm trying to get a good idea of what the current builds of a deck are looking like, or if I'm building a new deck that I'm not used to, what I want my build to look like. I try and, well, I shouldn't say I try not to. I typically don't pull a specific deck list. I just kind of reference a whole bunch of ones, or a whole bunch of deck lists, this breakdown, and then build the deck out from there. So we're taking a look at the Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck breakdown here. You can see, you know, 3 of Nerval, Fractal, and 100% of decks, 3 Kit and 99%, 3 Ash and 99%, 3 Tenki and 98%. Okay, so like these, you know, are 3 ofs in pretty much every build, right? Nerval, Fractal, Kit, Ash, Tenki, and Max C. Chaos, you can see, is a 2 of in 86%, and if we hover down, you can see is actually a 3 of in 14%. Similarly, if you hover over here, you can see actually the remaining percent of like how many copies they play. So, yeah, some people only play 2 Kit, a very small number of people apparently. Oops, where'd that go? Here we go. Apparently, some people only play 1 Ash, some people only play 2. Yeah, you can see there. 3 Revolt is 57%, interestingly enough, otherwise people play 2. I have considered cutting a Revolt. When I put in the droplets in particular, I was considering cutting a Revolt, so I could definitely see 2 copies here. Apparently a few people play 3 Chaos. I think 2 is definitely fine. Interestingly enough, a decent amount of people play 2 Desires. One of my Desires was actually another considered card I'm considering, or did consider cutting for a Droplet. In my Tri-Brigade build, so interesting to see that. Yeah, the Zodiac Thoroughblade, you can see it's actually kind of a toss-up between whether you play 2 or 1. I like having like one of each of the Zodiac monsters. I see some people not play, Whiptail at all. 41% don't play it. Don't understand that. I think Whiptail is a very, very useful Zodiac monster. I just like the variety of one of each, and I don't think the extra attack points are really that useful, or as useful for Thoroughblade as having the options. So, and Abiru, interestingly, it does see play in most Zodiac Tri-Brigade builds, most often at 2, sometimes at 1. It's interesting to note because, again, I was considering cutting 1 Nibiru to make room for my droplets. Droplets is another interesting one. If we look at it here, it's for the most part a 3 or 0 of, but a decent amount of people are playing 2. And some people are playing 1, although we can see that this means that about 70% of people are playing droplets. That is kind of one of the reasons that I actually added Drop. It's not that I'm just like, oh, if everybody else is playing it, I should too. But I did look through a lot of different builds and really see what people were playing and what they weren't playing versus what I was playing. Again, not in an effort to follow necessarily the meta, so to speak, but you also don't want to make sure you're falling behind, right? My Zodiac Tri-Brigade build I'd not changed, like, literally since the beginning of Season 2, and you definitely don't want to be playing an outdated build of a deck. When you're playing a meta deck, that is something to consider, right? Like, we can't just, like, grab a list and then use that list forever. We want to be thinking about our tech options, we want to be thinking about how the meta is evolving and how our deck should evolve along with the meta. Extra deck is fairly solid. You can see, like, you know, the lowest percents are like 81%, but that's only for Ferrigite because some people play 2, or like, you know, some people play the 0 of the Zodiac Exceeds monsters. Those are going to be for like pure Tri-Brigade builds, that's right. But yeah, extra deck is fairly solid. It's just pretty much in line with what my extra deck is, 100%. So yeah, spend a lot of time. And then yeah, if you scroll down to the bottom here, you can start looking at actual individual decks, and then you could go even to the page of top decks and you'll see like pages and pages of these decks. So I like to click through all these and start looking at all the lists, just to kind of get an idea of what I want my list to look like. So I highly recommend this process. So yeah, I spent a little bit more time than I intended to on the Zodiac Tri-Brigade one because I play this deck. I obviously have a lot to say about it. So let's look at some of the other decks as well. Okay, since DRYTRON here is on the rise, this will be the next deck we take a look at here. Yeah, here's the deck breakdown. Okay, now let's see here. I'm not really looking for anything in particular. I just think this is interesting to look at for all the different decks. I mean, we could see which cards always see a lot of play. I mean, this is very helpful to look at because, like, again, I don't play DRYTRONs at all. I've never played DRYTRONs, but again, we want to know thy enemy, right? Like, know what you're up against. It's so important to know that. So doing your proper research is a very important part of laddering, in my opinion. Of course, you also get the same experience like when you actually play against the deck, but I'm definitely more of like a research, or I like to think I'm equal parts like research-oriented versus experience-oriented. The extra deck in DRYTRON in particular is something I'm not as familiar with as I should be. I think it was in a recent video I got Sybil Nightingale into Zeus, and I was like, I didn't even realize DRYTRON could do that. Like, it's like I should know that, so that's why I like to try to refresh myself on these decks here. But yeah, I mean, this looks fairly standard from DRYTRON from what I've seen. You know, most of them are running Herald of Ultimateness. Not all of them are. Some of them are running Herald of Perfection instead. And a few honest, brave, pure DRYTRON players are not even running Heralds at all. But they're definitely few and far between. Yeah, Natasha isn't something you see all the time, but it's something you see most of the time. Again, one of the big DRYTRON at 50% is also pretty much in line from what my experience on ladders. So yeah, not a whole lot for me to say about DRYTRON as I have no experience with this deck except that yeah, again, you see the sample deck list, right? It'd be easy to be like, okay, here's a sample deck list, I'll just copy it. But you know, we got to consider this deck is a best of 3 format deck. It's got a side deck, so that doesn't necessarily affect, like, you could still probably play this build and run it fine on ladder, but it is definitely something to consider because decks are built slightly differently for best of 3 format as opposed to best of 1. So you want to be thinking about that definitely. And you can see for a lot of the more popular meta decks, they've even got handy little guides down here. That'll probably show you some of, like, the combos and stuff. Another cool thing I didn't mention earlier is that it tells you some of the best secret packs in order to craft these cards. It'll tell you like how many ultras and supers from the deck are in each pack. So yeah, overall a very helpful tool. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say about DRYTRON, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at Virtual World next. Virtual World is probably the meta deck I've played. Well, I guess now I've probably played against it about as much as I've played against DRYTRON. For a while, I hadn't seen Virtual World like at all. So, yeah, the first few times I played against it definitely took me by surprise. But we can see that it's interesting how much smaller this is for the the Virtual World deck, right? It's because they play a lot of 3-ofs, as we can see here, like, you know, 3 of Gigi, 3 of Kowloon, 3 of Qinglong, 3 of Lulu, 3 of Lao Lao, 3 of Lily, 3 Ash. Yeah, just a lot of 3-ofs in this deck. Most of them play 3 Desires. You know, they mostly play 2 Teleport. They also play 2 Chuchi. This I never feel like I'm saying that right, but yeah. So the deck list, I don't want to call it like solved. Obviously, it's not a solved deck list, but the main deck seems to be mostly set in stone. The extra deck seems to be a bit more malleable, not a whole lot more, but there are some definitely interesting tech choices. I mean, they're all running, of course, Shen Shen, and then they all go into the very, very fun Dragon and Zeus. They've got Stardust Charge Warrior, the Cloud Castle, Coral Dragon. Yeah, those are all pretty standard fare. But then you can see we actually dip down into like 75% range when it comes to like Ultimaya Zolkin and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. It seems a fair number of virtual decks are actually not playing those. So it is something you want to play around, you know, for the most part, but there is a decent chance your opponent might not have it. Looks like Phantom Knight's Breaksword is on the downtrend. I actually don't quite remember off the top of my head what you go into with this. I feel like I've seen, you know, my opponent do it once, but yeah, it doesn't look like it's quite as popular as it once was. 72 is still decent, though. Gossip Shadow seems to be a bit more of a tech than anything else, as not the majority of decks are playing it. Same with good old Utopia Beyond here, which I assume you play alongside Gossip Shadow. Yep, so once again, we want to watch for side decks when we're checking out the sample decks here, just again to make sure that we're not accidentally copying a deck that might not be suitable for ranked 1 ladder. Got more decks down here. So again, Virtual World, I've not played against, or sorry, with, so I don't know that I have a whole lot to say about like, oh, I think this card should be more representative, or I think this card should be included in this list, but I mean, yeah, this looks fairly standard from what I can tell, so let's take one look at the last deck here, which I believe is ADAMANCIPATOR here. Okay, last deck I'm going to be looking at for this video is going to be ADAMANCIPATOR. If you want to look at the tier 3 decks or some of the other top decks here, feel free to, of course, check out Master Duel Meta. I'm not actually sponsored by them at all. I just think it's a great resource and a tool. It'd be cool if I was sponsored by them. But anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at ADAMANCIPATOR, which I have definitely seen a noticeable increase in ADAMANCIPATOR decks on the ladder. So it definitely helps to know more about ADAMANCIPATORs, because at the beginning of Season 2, like, ADAMANCIPATORs really weren't on my radar at all. I hadn't seen them, I think, at all by the time Season 2 started. I didn't really notice them on a lot of tier lists, but yeah, you can see they've made their way up to tier 2, and I think they are also on the rise here. So, yeah, we take a look here. I can't believe Block Dragon isn't a 3-of in every single ADAMANCIPATOR deck. That kind of blows me away. Okay, so let's see. I'm just kind of peeking at the deck here. So most of them do play Nibiru. Okay, I saw one of at 49%. I was quite interested in that. It looks like they're mostly running the Prank Kids package. Of course, they pretty much all run O-Lion. Interestingly, it seems pretty 50-50 if they actually use Sekka's Light, although you can't really... yeah, it's Sekka. I thought it was Senka, but no, it's Sekka. Although I guess you can't use stuff like Call By or Foolish if you're using Sekka's Light, so... Miracle Rupture, okay, I don't see that on the list here, but apparently the sample build here anyway is using that. It is a tournament deck, though, to be fair. Got a combo guide for that. That's definitely needed for this deck. I know ADAMANCIPATOR is like the most combo intensive deck. I think pretty much the most intensive one out there. Yeah, extra deck, I mean, looks fairly standard. I recognize a lot of this is stuff you need to combo off, like their Synchros, the Gallant Granites, the Halqificax. They've got the board-ending cards like Appalachia, Boarload Savage, Access Code, IP Masquerena. Yeah, ADAMANCIPATORs is quite interesting, especially in that it can be hard to know when to like chain your disruption cards. Like, when do I Ash? When do I Max? Well, Max you obviously want to do in the beginning, but like when to Ash in particular, I tend to Ash as early into the combo as possible, even though it's pretty likely your opponent's going to be able to continue going off anyway. There is always the off chance that you stop them early and they can't do anything. That is generally speaking, against most combo decks, where you're most likely to force them into dead draws with dead combo pieces is at the beginning. So, I don't know necessarily that's always the best time to do it against Adamancipators, just because they do so much. The other thing too is that like Block Dragon is insane for recursion. I think this card is banned in the TCG, but somehow at 3 in Master Duel that is. But yeah, like even if you like stop this card, or if it just goes from field to grave for any reason, they just pretty much add another combo to their hand. It's so ridiculous, but it's not that bad, actually. Being very combo-based, it is fairly vulnerable to disruption, particularly like Nibiru here. Nibiru and Maxi are fairly devastating against Adamancipator. The rise of Adamancipator and also of DRYTRON, which also summons a lot, is why I think Nibiru is going to be pretty good. Like, not only is very good now, but will be even better going forward as we see these decks that combo a lot start to see a slight increase in play. Alright, so that's all I've got for you in this meta recap video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you like this kind of content where we talk more about like the meta or laddering as opposed to looking at a specific deck or specific games, do let me know in the comments, because if the response to these kinds of videos is good enough, I'm definitely down to make more of them. So yeah, if you like them, do let me know. But even if you don't comment, I always appreciate you guys watching. You know that. I say it all the time, and I feel like I can't say it enough. So, guys, thank you again for sticking through to the end here. This is Hexlex, signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.